Hi, this is Jamey, and I'm going to talk today about my favorite game mechanism in the biggest game I've ever hefted onto this video, Mechs versus Minions. So, Mechs versus Minions is a cooperative programming game with a campaign element to it. I played the tutorial and the first game a few days ago. This is going to be completely spoiler-free. And there's a couple mechanisms I want to talk about because there's a lot of clever stuff going on in this game. The first is the tutorial. My friends and I went to see Doctor Strange the other night, had a great time, and then on the way home we were still wanting to hang out, and I was like, well, why don't we just go home and play Mechs vs. Minions? I've been wanting to play it. Normally with any game of this size and this heft, there's no way that I would ask people to play a game with me before knowing any of the rules. I hadn't read the rule book. But I knew that Mechs vs. Minions had this tutorial that kind of just walked you through the rules. You don't have to read the rules in advance at all. And that's exactly what we did, and it was brilliant. We just sat down, opened the tutorial, and it walked us through everything beautifully. And we did it together. It wasn't something that one person was leading. We were all in it together, which is awesome. I'd love to see that in more games. And I talked about that a lot in videos, ways that games can invite players into the game without putting the burden on them of reading a long rule book, which is not a burden for everyone, but for many people it is. The other part is, and another thing that I've talked about on this channel a lot, is how to prevent quarterbacking in cooperative games and how to prevent players in cooperative games from feeling like they're just doing their own thing and they're not really part of the team. It's a really tough balance between those two things in cooperative games. And Mechs vs. Minions does this really, really well through a few mechanisms. One, there's a timer. So at one of the points in the game where you're making a key decision, you at the beginning of every round, basically, you draft some cards. Every player ends up with one card. And again, it's cooperative. So there is some element of discussion here. And this is where you're all kind of in it together. You're discussing which card is good for which player. But it's timed. In the tutorial it isn't timed, but by the first game it is timed, and that matters because it means that you can't sit there for 20 minutes and have one player look through all the cards and look through all the things that all the players can do and just tell them what to do. It is impossible to quarterback due to that timed element. I really like that timer as a mechanism for preventing quarterbacking. The other mechanism that prevents quarterbacking is that Mechs vs. Minions is a programming game where you are programming your individual mech to move around the board. And it is really hard, and everybody has their own line of programming. So you have all these cards on this player mat, and you activate the cards from left to right, and your little mech does what those cards say that your mech should do. And it is almost impossible for any player to walk through the steps that another player has on their mat because your perspective is so focused on your mech and what your mech and your programming line and what your mech will walk through when you activate your programming line. You can't, it's just like you don't have the brain power to do that for all the other mechs on the board. And so this is another way to combat quarterbacking basically, which is complication. I mean, it's complicated. It's not, well, no, I guess it's more complexity. It's not complicated. It's complex. You can't parse that amount of information from all those other players. And the second part is perspective. When you're so focused on your own individual perspective, especially in terms of movement around a board, it's really hard to switch that perspective and put yourself in the shoes of another mech on the board. You kind of have to learn to trust those players. And you just have to let go. Even if you want to quarterback, you can't do that. You can't physically. I mean, I guess you could physically get around stand up and walk around the board and put yourself in that perspective. But even then, you're having to switch off your own mech and go to somebody else's mech. And so the game, it just does a really good job of using that complexity and that timer and that perspective element to prevent quarterbacking. If you played Mechs vs. Minions, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the tutorial or those elements of preventing quarterbacking in the game, while still allowing players to feel like they're part of a team because they're making some decisions together, especially the drafting decision. And this is a topic that I've talked about before, so if you want to share this element of perception or complexity in other cooperative games and how that prevents quarterbacking, I'd love to hear that as well. Thanks.